I'm so excited to have Sarah Crawford-Bohl joining me today on the Leadership Adventure podcast. Sarah is an experienced Canadian healthcare executive, as well as a TEDx speaker, and I thought she would be amazing to invite to today's podcast to talk about psychological safety. Welcome, Sarah. It's so great to have you join us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Kasia.
I'd love to just start to understand a little bit about your career trajectory and what got you here into an executive role. Would you share a little bit about these key turning points in your career, in your personal adventure?
Absolutely. I think it goes way back. They say that healthcare is in the genetics, and for me, it certainly was. My mom was a nurse, and I often watched her as I grew up and thought, I loved the impact that she seemed to have on her patients and the people she worked with. We'd bump into people in the mall, and my mom would have cared for them, and they just, there was this one fellow, he came up and gave her this huge hug. She'd looked after his wife when the wife was in intensive care, and my mom was her nurse. And that was kind of the moment where I was like, okay, I want to have this type of impact on people. So that got me into the career. And I thought initially that I was going to use nursing as that was my first stop in healthcare was as a nurse. But I thought I was going to do it as a precursor to medicine. And, I was like, I was going to be a doctor. This was just going to get me started. But then I got into healthcare and I realized that they weren't my people. It was more, I just didn't feel at home around the physicians. And interestingly, I'm not sure I totally felt at home with the nursing staff. But I looked around and I saw some pretty inspirational leaders. And I thought, and I saw some leaders that didn't inspire me, if I'm being totally honest. But the people who did inspire me, they were so different. They were so unique. There was something about them that wanted me to be a better person, wanted me to be a better healthcare provider, wanted me to be a better colleague. I wanted to make a difference like they were making. And so I started to watch them and spend time around them, creating opportunities to meet them, have one-on-ones, that sort of thing, learn about their journeys. I think that creating the connections with some of those people who became mentors to me was a key first step on my leadership journey, showing that I've got the interest in other people and willing to show up as a learner. And so I think I found some wonderful mentors. I spent the first couple of years as a frontline nurse, but very quickly someone saw that I had an interest in teaching. And I was doing some in-services, some tutorials during my lunch break for staff because we had a bit of a gap around education at that time, and we were dealing with some new skills that people had that were unfamiliar. So I was like, all right, I'm going to do a bit of research and I'm going to bring this in. I'm going to teach some people some stuff. Looking back, I'm like, who was I to be teaching people anything? I was just a beginner, but anyway. I think that it created a bit of visibility, people saying, who's this little whippersnapper? Like she's got a bit of fire in her belly and she's doing something different. So people saw that, I think someone saw that in me and asked me to step into a leadership role doing some teaching, hospital orientation for new employees. That was my first leadership role. And I really enjoyed it. It was a wonderful, wonderful first step in leadership. And that emerged into other leadership opportunities. I became one of the first frontline leaders in not in a management space, but we didn't have head nurses so much in the hospital that I worked at. And they created a role. It was called the clinical nurse leader, very much a head nurse type of position. And again, I was young and much younger than some of my colleagues. And I don't know if that went over entirely well that I stepped into that role, having so much less experience. But again, I was putting myself out there, taking a risk, following my heart around where my passions lie. And really, it was coming from this place of wanting to serve the people that I worked with. And knowing that if we support the people that we work with, they will in turn serve our patients better. So stepped into those roles and found other mentors that kept fanning the flame. I was very fortunate to have people who created opportunities for me. And some of that was me making sure that they knew that I was interested in those opportunities. Showing up as a learner, I think, has been a big, what's the word I'm looking for? Tactic, a strategy that felt right for me in my heart. Didn't always serve me well. I met some people who perhaps thought that showing up as a learner wasn't necessarily demonstrating competence or confidence.
Well, that's interesting.
But in the end, I think it was a good step. So lots of steps along the way, and people to help and coach me, and really often going out of my comfort zone.
It sounds like you were already showing up as a leader doing the teaching, and that was noticed. And so you were offered some opportunities as a result, but you made those choices first to do something different.
I think so. Good observation. Yeah, nice reflection there. Thank you.
How did you find some of these mentors? Because I know that this is something that a lot of people wish for. And I've actually, I was one of the first opportunities I had was supporting women at the Australian Institute of Marine Science who needed mentors in their field. Yes. And they were really struggling to find someone who would be able to fill that for them. So I was curious how you identified mentors and how you made that request, because I think just having this conversation live might help people to be able to have those conversations.
Good point. I think it starts with a scan of your values, a scan of how you feel around other leaders, what feels right. Because when I'm around some leaders, and they're not bad leaders, it's just a style that doesn't necessarily resonate with me. And a key tell for me is when I'm around someone, do I feel strong? Do I feel confident? Do I feel supported to be vulnerable? Do I have that psychological safety with them to be totally myself, even the self that I'm maybe embarrassed to show to the world? So when I looked across, the people around me, and when I say leaders and mentors, they're not necessarily people who are in those formal leadership roles. Sometimes they are, absolutely, but sometimes they're just the colleague, the person who you watch their style and you think, yeah, I want to be like that. That inspires me. I feel safe around that person. I like how they show up in the world, and I like how they show up with people. So I think I noticed some folks who were both formal and informal leaders that I felt good being around. And coming forward with curiosity is probably how I created the connection. So really learning about those other people, asking for a coffee date, even just sitting side by side, on the surgical unit, I'd be sitting side by side the person and ask some questions and create the opportunity for dialogue. I think that's a big first step. I remember being in a position where I thought, oh, I want that person to mentor me. And I think I asked if they would be my mentor. It reminds me of a children's book. Are you my mother? It's like, are you my mentor? And it didn't work out for me. If you haven't read the book, it's pretty cute. I think it's worth a read. But it's about really finding your people, and people that resonate with your values, people that resonate with your soul. And it didn't work out for me. So I wouldn't say that necessarily it's about asking someone to be your mentor. It's something that has to feel good for both parties. And it can be very tough to find that person. But when I think about people who have reached out to me for mentorship, I would say they just create the opportunities. Hey, Sarah, would you can I have a virtual coffee date? Absolutely. I'd have a virtual coffee date. And sometimes I'm the one who's like, let's meet again. Like, I really enjoyed talking to you. And so it evolves from there. And sometimes it's the other person who prompts a second or third meeting. Either way, I think that the initiative to just create the opportunities for connection versus mentorship, the mentorship almost just evolves more naturally out of the connection versus it being a task, something specific that we go out and seek.
Thank you for sharing that. So a smaller ask can go a long way to build the relationship, and both people get an opportunity to see if that's what they want. Because I know some people have told me they were asked to be a mentor, and sometimes they actually don't see themselves as a mentor figure, or they're intimidated a little bit about the time that it might require. So I like what you're sharing with us today, that you can just get started. But one of the things I've noticed is that people are so busy in workplaces these days that it can actually be hard to have quality conversations. So how do you make time for that?
Book a meeting. My daughter's out, like, how do I describe what you do? And I say, well, I meet with people, because that's really a big part of my day. And I think a lot of people in formal leadership roles, they would say the same. And so to have a virtual coffee date can feel like such a gift, to sit down and work with someone to help them, just to talk through where they want to go in their career, what's working, what's not, where they might be able to create opportunities for professional growth. For I think a lot of people in leadership roles, those are conversations that feel very meaningful, and that to be able to step into them is something that we appreciate. So I set up a meeting. I ask, hey, can we have a 30-minute touch base? It's amazing what you can talk about in 30 minutes. You can really get to know someone quite quickly if you're willing to get right into it. Not talk about the weather, but talk about who they are as people. What's their family life? Where did they come from? It's amazing how just those sorts of the conversations about the person behind the leader, they go a long way to creating the connection. So I would say set up a meeting, ask for some time, keep it short. Don't ask for 1 hour to start you off. Even 15, 20 minutes can be enough to initiate the conversation, initiate the dialogue and the connection. And that's something that can be built on later.
Yeah. And I know that, you're great at asking questions, because I often find I'm divulging things to you that I'm not expecting, and telling you about, my family health things that I don't actually tell a lot of people, because I just think, oh, nobody wants to hear that stuff. So,
and I love it. I truly enjoy it. Yeah. Thank you. I'm glad.
I can see, how you create that environment that offers people that psychological safety. And so I think you're really a great person to share with us what can we do when we don't feel that? And at least explore this topic, because we might not have all the answers here, and it might not be for every environment, right? It takes a lot of courage sometimes to speak up when we don't feel that, we know what the consequences are going to be. So I'd love your take on what we can do in that kind of situation.
Oh, it's something I think about a lot. I post about it a lot on LinkedIn. Even people who are formal leaders, have been in formal leadership roles for a long time, I still see and hear people feel that imposter syndrome, or feel like they're on shaky ground in a meeting, unsure if their voice is something that will resonate with others, or whether it's a safe place to speak up at that time. Giving feedback's another tricky one that a lot of people think, who am I to give feedback to that person? Or it brings big social risk for me to give feedback or speak up in this particular environment. So, I think that there's a couple of things I lean on. One is and I've mentioned it already, so it's a bit of a theme, I guess, across my life, one is to show up as a learner. To speak up with a question sometimes feels better than speaking up with a statement. And bringing that curiosity in is a strategy for minimizing the chance of a defensive response. When you come forward with authentic curiosity, not the kind of the question that's really a dig, those questions that people are like, well, yeah, I can't even think of one right now, but it happens a lot where the question is put across with a bit of bite. I'm not talking about those curious questions. I'm talking about the ones where we want to throw something into the room, not sure about how it's going to land, and you use a curious, authentic question in order to put it out there. So, for example, if I'm in a meeting and I'm feeling like this isn't exactly a comfortable space, I might say, I'm wondering if we've thought of, or can I put something out there? I'm wondering if this is something we could consider. So even just framing it as something I'm still thinking about or working on is one strategy. Another one that I use a lot is naming it. And in neuroscience, they say around tricky emotions, uncomfortable emotions, to name them helps to tame them. So it helps us to get out of the amygdala, the back of our brain that's responsible for the fight, flight, or freeze, that really reactive response, and into our frontal cortex, where we can be rational and bring in our critical thinking. So if I'm noticing I'm feeling a bit unsafe in the moment, I might actually say that into the room. Even just saying it to myself can help to tame the emotion. So I'm not feeling overly safe to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'll say that to myself first. Sometimes I actually say that out loud. You know what? I'm feeling a bit nervous about putting this into the room. I'm a bit unsure if this is something I should say right now, but I'm going to say it and hopefully it lands well. So I'll make sure to acknowledge it for myself first, that I'm feeling a bit unsure here. And then I make sure that I acknowledge it to the room, to the group, because I think it helps people to get into that space of feeling a bit of compassion, a bit of empathy for someone who's going out on the limb, because we've all been there. So two main strategies, I'd say.
I love that. The first one you shared, it actually aligns really well with some of the work that I've been doing to help leaders. So asking a question can be so powerful, and yet it's not something that a lot of people think about when they haven't had training to do that. And so I love that you've shared it, because it is often how we ask that question. And it can be multiple questions as well, having a real dialogue and evolving that conversation, right? So that's a different approach than a lot of people who think, oh, I just have to share this big idea.
Yes. Start
Right?
small. Just start with a little thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the second one, I find that really interesting. I'm curious if you have had anyone comment on that, or the fact that you said that you don't feel safe, to help you feel more safe.
I've had probably the largest comments are from other people in the room who will send me a direct message, maybe on the chat function if we're online, or tell me later, you know what, I'm glad you said that, because I was feeling that way too. Or, I was feeling pretty nervous as well. So sometimes by doing so, it gives a bit of permission for others to feel that way. It's validating for others, because usually if you're feeling nervous, there's probably other people in the room feeling nervous too, even if it's just you and one other person. A bit of energy there, a bit of tension that you're sensing is probably being felt as well for the other person. So putting it out into the room seems to help to minimize, or not minimize, what's the word I'm looking for? Settle the nerves for everybody involved. I think that I've had it come back to haunt me later, maybe where it didn't work out so well, where maybe, I had a situation where I went in feeling vulnerable, thinking that I was going to put that out into the space. And I think maybe it showed up as a lack of confidence. And I know that confidence and displaying confidence is an important leadership trait. And so there's this sort of fine balance, a bit of a polarity. We're trying to hold both things at once, this humility, vulnerability, and confidence, competence in some sort of balance. That's very tricky, particularly for female leaders, in my experience. And so after the fact, hearing the feedback that perhaps that demonstrated to the person I was speaking with, too much on the vulnerability end, too much on that polarity. I thought, would I have done it differently? Like, was my behavior, was I in alignment with my values? And if I am, then I think it was worth the risk. That integrity is an important value. Sometimes it's worth it. And then sometimes it's I can recognize, you know what, I leaned too far there, that sometimes I feel a bit nervous to show my confidence, worried that I'm going to show up too cocky, or worried that it's going to be off-putting. And so I think it is, for me, it's been a bit of a dance. Is okay, you know what? I need to show up with my I think vulnerability is a superpower. It's a great way of connecting with people, but at the same time, maintaining that it's okay for me to show my confidence too. It's okay to show up and shine. So I find that that's a bit of a delicate dance.
Yeah, and it makes me think about the environment, because that is going to be so dependent on the culture and whether there's trust, right? Whether you can trust. And I know that a lot of my clients end up managing perceptions and putting a lot of energy into these decisions about how to show up. And it's something that I think is interesting, because when that environment can be safe to share, right, then a lot more energy can go into the actual work, rather than all this inner talk that can take up time and energy, and worrying, the tension. All of that has a cost, right? What's your take on the kind of environment that the executives that want to create? Do they really want to have a psychologically safe environment, or is it more like, don't make my life hard, better to just, stay quiet and get things done fast, so to speak?
Yeah.
Without all these,
I think it's a really good question. The bulk of the people that truly the majority, I think, are people who want to create an environment that is psychologically safe. And the reality is, we are perfectly imperfect people, right? We are people who are having a very human experience where our own vulnerabilities come into play. Our own insecurities show up from time to time. When we feel threatened as a leader, and it truly happens for most of us that we feel threatened, who do we bring forward in that moment? Who shows up? Is it the person who invites others to be vulnerable too? Is it the leader in us that invites others to show that they're learners in the space, that they can make mistakes? Oftentimes I think that's who we want to bring forward. But the reality is, when we're having that reactive response, the reactive leader shows up, and it's going to, for everyone, then sometimes out come the talons, out comes the leader that we don't want to be necessarily. And so I think that we have to allow leaders to be imperfect and try and see the intention behind the action. I think that really helps me to recognize when the behavior in front of me isn't necessarily creating the culture that the organization that you're working for recommends and is trying to achieve, or even that the leaders themselves want to achieve. So what's going on for that person in that time? I was listening to this awesome podcast from Stephen Bartlett. Do I have that right? Stephen Bartlett. Yeah. He had this guest on that talked about fog, fear, obligation, and guilt. And how I took that was, or the words and how I interpreted it was that when we're in the grip, when we're feeling some tension ourselves, or when we're feeling out of control, people will use fear, obligation, and guilt to try and gain control of the situation, of the conversation. And so when you're hearing those things, someone trying to create fear, someone trying to, they're just trying to create a bit of fear in the room, someone who's using obligation to nudge the conversation one way, or trying to perhaps create a guilty emotion in the person that they're speaking to, I've got to wonder, what's the fear they're experiencing themselves? Because usually when those tactics come out, that person isn't feeling so secure within themselves. So I think that so I've given you perhaps a longer explanation than was asked for, Kasia, but most leaders, I think, want to create a positive culture. And we're going to show up in those times where we don't. And how can others, us included, when we're the ones on the receiving end, how can we process those moments? And perhaps a bit of curiosity to wonder what's going on for the other person, and a little empathy to recognize not everyone's going to have a great day might help us in those moments.
I think the point that you've raised is really interesting because, I think a lot of the time people just don't know or think about the fact that another executive might feel threatened. It kind of, for a lot of, I would say, lower level leaders who are, aspiring to be executives, it looks like that executive has made it and they don't have anything else to worry about, right? And so even sometimes I've been surprised speaking to very established executives who might struggle with confidence in a new context, right? Because it's not always clear what needs to happen. And there's so much change that executives have to navigate these days. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what are some of these threats that you see executives facing where they might not feel psychological safety, and that can have an effect on the whole organization?
Oh, absolutely. Well, in today's the average workplace, we're facing increasingly rapid cycles of change, and change creates uncertainty. And so for most people, our brain, well, I would say I think the science of the neuroscience perspective is that our brains crave certainty. We like to know what we're doing, what's coming next. And when we face uncertainty, we get into that fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. It's that absolute reactive nature that is craving certainty, craving that we've got it. We've got this moment. Like, we're leaders. We know exactly what to do. But when we're faced with something new and we don't, it's very easy for us to face that automatic reaction. So change is absolutely a constant. And so we can assume that most leaders are facing situations that they've not faced before. They're facing conversations they've not faced before. It's not just technology. It's new workflows, new rules, new roles and responsibilities. The world is evolving. The political space is unnerving. The financial landscape is uncertain. I think even in one's personal life, not just in the professional space, we're showing up at work with all sorts of stories, all sorts of elements of life are contributing to how we show up at work. So I think those are some elements that to consider.
Thank you for sharing that. And I remember having a conversation with someone who was promoted from within to be a CEO. And they told me the first thing they said, I don't know what my responsibilities are. And it was quite a surprise for me because I thought, I guess we're going to have to find out, right? And so what are some of the first steps? And I know that often the focus is on the work, right? And to me, it's so important to look at what are these relationships that need to be built to be able to understand the landscape, right? And so when people transition to a new company or environment, to be able to create that psychological safety in a new place, it can be challenging. And it just came to mind because I was having a conversation with someone who was asked to take on a role, and there was no existing psychological safety because the previous executives who were there created a lot of fear in that environment. So I'm curious, what's your take on, and if you are comfortable to share, what can you do in an environment that is so tense and fear-based if you step in to that to be able to create an environment that supports open dialogue?
Oh yeah, there's some great research out there. Amy Edmondson is a fantastic researcher, author, speaker. She talks a lot about how to create psychological safety in teams. So I love to listen to her take. For me, I think about people first. And we've talked a little bit about this already, the importance of connection. And so getting to know the person behind the role is often my first step. So when I'm stepping into a space where perhaps the team has not experienced a great deal of psychological safety, I start with getting to know the person. And that's the thread I carry through my work. So when I'm meeting with my team members one-on-one, I try to spend the first few minutes just connecting with who they are as a person. How was the wedding you went to? How was your weekend? Are kids back to school? Like just taking a couple of minutes to connect human to human, I think is a good first step. I went to a university called Royal Roads, did a master's in leadership there, and they have a strategy that they recommend, which is to always start with vision and values. And so when you're meeting with a team, to get together and talk about what are the values that we want to see in our team environment? How do we want to show up together? So really trying to understand what's important to them as individuals and as a team, trying to get some alignment between, okay, would we all agree that these are the values that we want to see? Because sometimes we know them up here, we might know them in our hearts. They're hard to demonstrate. So if we can put them out there and make them visible, put them up on I put it at the top of an agenda sometimes, on regular agenda template. Here's the values that we're going to use as a team. Put them up on the wall. Trying to make sure that we're clear on how we want to show up. And then when we get into a meeting where there's some tension, or get into a dialogue where there's some tension, it's nice to lean on those values and say, okay, are we showing up with those values right now? Or let's just take a minute and talk about the values we've discussed. Let's just review those quickly, because we're leaning into a space where it's got some energy, it's got a bit of tension. And those are often opportunities for building trust. As much as we try and avoid them, those tricky conversations are the opportunity to win over, is that the right word, or to create a deeper connection with someone. So there are opportunities to lean into for sure, but to lean into them while recognizing the values that are really important to people. So personal connection, and then leaning on the team values.
Yeah.
Even if a team
so
is
what
just
I'm hearing is that creates a solid foundation, even
Yes.
though there might be all this other uncertainty going on. Then we have connection and the support that we need to navigate that. But yet there's often a lot of political concern. How do you handle that?
And is your question, Kasia, around as a leader in that space, or is it as a team member in the space? Because I think this strategy is the same, but to make sure I'm speaking from the right angle.
I'm just curious how you do it as a person to manage your emotions, to handle, tough situations that you have faced where perhaps you don't feel that trust, to people around you.
Thank you
it's
for the
an
clarification.
uncertain moment. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have a question I ask myself and I ask the team I work with. I bring it up a lot. And the question is, what's the good and right thing to do? So in those moments where I'm feeling shaky or feeling unsure, maybe feeling unsafe, I ask myself, what's the good and right thing to do here? Because usually my internal values will give me a bit of a path to follow. And if I'm in the room with people where energy's high, there's some tension in the room, I'll put that question out there. What's the good and right thing to do here? What's the good and right thing to do for the person we're trying to serve? What's the good and right thing to do for our team? What's the good and right thing for us to do as people? And so putting that question to myself and posing it into the room often helps to change the energy a bit. It helps to pull people together and align them towards a shared purpose. So I think that's a very important step. I would say that vulnerability, I've mentioned it is a superpower. So I will absolutely say, I'm feeling nervous here. I'm feeling uncomfortable. I'm noticing some tension in the room, and I don't know about you guys, but I'm a bit uncomfortable right now. If I can put my vulnerability into the room, it can also help to shift the energy. It brings out people's compassion and empathy, and I start to see that and feel that. So I think the vulnerability is a big one. And then the last one I think that I lean on regularly is curiosity. So I mentioned a little bit before too, that if I'm feeling unsure and shaky, I'm usually in that protective space, I can watch it in my body language. My arms cross, my shoulders will raise up. Maybe I'm leaning back from creating some space between me and the other person. I can see it and feel it in my body language. So that's a trigger for me. I'm like, okay, I'm not feeling safe here. If I go, okay, I'm self-protective. Right now, I'm looking after myself. If I can shift gears and try and focus on supporting the other person, it helps to get me out of protecting myself in that reactive space and more into a space where I can be responsive and interact from a different lens. So I'll ask, what's going on for the other person? What's going on for the people in this room? Back to that fog, the fog analogy or fog acronym. What is the unmet need being experienced by the person I'm around? Usually most conflict arises out of a perception of unmet need or a perception of scarcity. Those seems to be the main drivers of conflict. And that fear, obligation, and guilt are strategies that people use to create a sense of control in those moments. So if I can get curious and think, what might be going on for the other person? What might be what might be giving this perception of scarcity, or what's the unmet need in the room? What's the unmet need being shared by that person? What are they getting at? And I might even ask that. Mm-hmm. What are you experiencing right now? And that helps to create the space for us to time out of time.
It's a great question to get down to understanding what's really going on, right? Because then all of a sudden you can start to explore things that change the perception completely. And I love that that's where you've landed with that response, because it circles back to what we were talking about before, that asking a question can be so much more helpful in that moment. And, when you were talking about that idea of self-protection, that's so often the case when people feel that they have to walk around protecting themselves. And I just recently have had some of these conversations about giving feedback to someone that seems like they wouldn't be responsive to feedback in a positive way. And they've actually, been afraid that they might be backstabbed if they offer any feedback, right? And that's one of the things we're discussing, is that idea of asking a few questions and also building our understanding and empathy as a result to be able to come to some solutions there. So, I think that sometimes it can be hard for people to even understand what they need as an individual. And so the way that we frame that question as you did, it sounds like it would be a good way to help them to process what it is that they might need. I know sometimes I've asked myself what I need in a certain situation, and I didn't always know the answer to that.
No idea. There's a great author called Gervais Bush, Bushe. I'm not sure how he pronounces his last name, but he talks about and writes about something called the experience cube. Have you heard of the experience cube?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it's a great tool. It's a tool that I use, that he recommends for when we need to give feedback. It's got four elements to it. My architect sister says it's not a cube, it's 4 squares. So if anyone's listening that's like, hold on, there's 4 squares, not a cube. But observations, thoughts, feelings, and wants. 4 elements to share when we're giving feedback. To your point about not knowing what we need, if I can frame that out for myself, what am I seeing that's creating a rub for me? What am I thinking? What's the story I'm making up in my head? What are the things what are my judgments? What's my internal interpretation of what I'm seeing? What am I feeling in the moment? Am I feeling nervous, mad, sad, glad, fear? And what do I want? Those 4 questions seem to help me to figure out what I need. And if I'm listening to someone, to your point, we don't always know what we need. And maybe the other person can't articulate it either. If I can listen for those 4 things, like, am I hearing what they're seeing in this moment? Am I hearing what they're thinking? Am I hearing what they're feeling? Am I hearing what they're wanting? Then it might give some insight into what they need. And sometimes I'll ask them, I'm hearing you're seeing this. I'm making up a story that you're thinking this about what you're seeing. I think I'm hearing you're wanting this. I'm not sure how you feel about it, but I'm making up a story you're feeling whatever, nervous. So I really like that tool for trying to get clear on what I want and trying to get clear on what the other person needs as well.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like it comes down to having real conversations and really being able to understand what the other person is experiencing, right? Which does require some courage and trust there to be able to share openly. And, thinking back to what I asked you before about creating that kind of environment, do you feel that executives get adequate training on these kinds of skills to be able to create psychological safety and a thriving workplace?
Good question. I think it depends on the workplace. I know I work for an organization that does put a great deal of focus on that, but I know others who haven't had any professional development offered to them in their roles. But even when it's offered, doesn't mean that we are taking it or that we are absorbing it and applying it. Mm-hmm. So whether it's offered in your organization or not, I think it's about recognizing that as a leader, most people in leadership roles are leaders because they were great doers. They were technicians in their chosen career, and they showed some prowess there. They were strong at whatever trade or skill they were responsible for, and then were propelled into leadership roles, and those two don't necessarily translate. So when we find ourselves in a leadership position, but if we're feeling a need to support the people that we work with, doing a bit of self-learning, it's something I do a lot, is listening to your podcasts, your PodQuest, reading for myself. Asking feedback is a great way to learn whether leadership development is offered or not. Simply just asking for feedback and exploring that feedback is a great strategy. So I think that it's not often included is the answer to your question, but that doesn't mean that we can't take the initiative ourselves to develop our leadership strengths aside from the technical abilities that we have to show up with.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your thoughts. And one of the comments that I've had as well, speaking to absorption, that because everyone's so busy, if they go to a 1 or 2 day course, it can be so hard to implement and have time to reflect. So building in that strategic time to work on these areas and actually make clear decisions. Okay, this is what I want to implement. This is how I think that might help. This is how I can adapt or adjust this approach to evolve it. And that's often what we work on in coaching, to make space for ongoing learning and development, right? Because that space can be so hard to find in a busy life. And with all this uncertainty happening, it can also be good to have that focused time. I know sometimes in meetings, it can be hard sometimes to come up with a good question, and a good focusing question is, what's really the most important thing here? I love to share that because it helps to center
I love it.
Conversation and to really start from what matters the most to evolve. And so it's a good sort of bottom liner.
I love it. There's a science called human systems dynamics, and they talk about what's the difference that's going to make the difference here. So a little twist on what you've said. I really like the angle of what matters, like what really matters to you. And sometimes when we don't know, asking what's the difference that's going to make the difference might help.
Yeah, love that. Sarah, thank you so much for your contribution today. I really appreciate what you've shared with us. Is there anything you'd love to leave us with before we wrap up?
Oh,
Any final wisdom?
Oh no, thank you. Just the gratitude to you, Kasia. Thank you so much for what you do here. I love your podcasts. I love that you risk to ask some tricky questions. I love that you bring forward a space that allows me to be vulnerable and your guests to be vulnerable too. So thank you for what you do in demonstrating great leadership. I really appreciate you, and I'm inspired by you. So thank you.
My pleasure, Sarah. It's been an honor to have you here today, sharing some of these insights on some difficult topics that so many leaders are facing today. So I think that this will be helpful for quite a lot of our listeners.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I wish you a wonderful day.
You too.